The story of first man begins in 1965, with test pilot Neil Armstrong piloting the high-altitude X-15 rocket plane. As he ascends above Earth's atmosphere, Neil struggles to stabilize the aircraft as it starts skipping off the edge of space. He receives instructions from the control center, but things don't go as planned. The aircraft begins hurtling back toward Earth, out of alignment and at a dangerous speed. Despite the critical situation, Neil maintains his calm. He regains control just in time and successfully lands the craft in the desert. It's a close call, but Neil walks away. Later, NASA expresses concerns that he may have been distracted, perhaps due to personal issues. And indeed, Neil is carrying a heavy emotional burden. At home, Neil and his wife Janet are battling a much deeper crisis. Their 3-year-old daughter, Karen, is seriously ill. She's suffering from a brain tumor. They do everything they can, visiting doctors and specialists, but the prognosis remains grim. Neil holds on to hope, desperately wishing to save her, but despite all efforts, Karen dies. Her death breaks Neil. He doesn't express it openly, but it deeply impacts him. He withdraws emotionally, bearing the pain inside. Shortly after, he applies to NASA's Gemini program, a major leap forward in America's space race, aiming to ultimately land a man on the moon. Some believe Neil is trying to escape his grief, or perhaps give it a purpose. He is selected for the program. The training is brutal. Neil and his fellow astronauts undergo extreme physical and mental challenges. Simulators spin them in all directions, testing their ability to stay conscious and in control. Some pass out, some vomit. But Neil stays focused. Despite the difficult training, Neil rarely talks about Karen. Not with Janet, not with his friends. But we, the viewers, see the silent pain in his eyes. Time moves forward. During one visit to his friend's house, a news report announces that Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov has performed the world's first spacewalk. He's the first human to leave his spacecraft and float in open space. The Soviets have pulled ahead again, and NASA is under enormous pressure to catch up. NASA intensifies its efforts. Meanwhile, Neil focuses on his next mission. But tragedy strikes when fellow astronaut Elliot C. dies in a crash. It's a chilling reminder of the risks involved. Janet worries, but Neil keeps his emotions buried and his eyes on the goal. Eventually, Neil is selected for the Gemini 8 mission. He and pilot David Scott are assigned a critical task: to dock with an unmanned vehicle in orbit, known as the Agena. This has never been done before. If successful, it'll be a historic milestone. They launch into space, and the docking is successful. But shortly after, something goes terribly wrong. Their spacecraft begins spinning rapidly, out of control. At first, they believe the problem is with the Agena, so they undock. But the spinning continues. Neil realizes the issue lies in one of their own thrusters, which is stuck in the on position. He makes the split-second decision to shut down the main thruster system and switch to the re-entry thrusters. It works. The spinning stops. But they've used up too much fuel and are forced to make an emergency landing in the Pacific Ocean. NASA considers the mission both a success and a near disaster. Neil is praised for his calm decision-making, but questions rise about safety. Back on Earth, the emotional toll is mounting. Then comes a devastating blow. A fire erupts inside the Apollo 1 spacecraft during a ground test. 3 astronauts die, including Neil's close friends Ed White, Roger Chaffee, and Gus Grissom. Neil receives the tragic news while at the White House. He's shocked. Once again, death has taken more of his friends. NASA halts the Apollo missions for an investigation. Janet grows more concerned for Neil's safety, especially as he continues to suppress his grief. A year later, Neil begins training with the Lunar Landing Research Vehicle, a dangerous machine that simulates moon landings. During one flight, the craft malfunctions. Neil ejects just in time before it crashes and explodes. He narrowly escapes death again. His superiors tell him they should consider abandoning this simulator. It's too dangerous. But Neil insists this is necessary. He knows what's at stake. At home, Janet confronts him. She's tired of being in the dark, tired of the silence. She sees her husband becoming more distant, more obsessed with his mission. She reminds him that this journey could cost him his life, and he needs to acknowledge that with his children. After countless simulations, high-risk tests, and personal losses, Neil Armstrong is chosen to command Apollo 11, NASA's most important mission, the first human landing on the moon. The weight of history rests on his shoulders. At home, Janet is visibly tense. She's watched many of Neil's fellow astronauts go on missions and never return. She fears Neil will be next. As the launch day draws near, she confronts him. She demands that he speak honestly with their sons, to tell them that he might not come back. Neil sits down with his two boys in a quiet, intimate scene. They ask him, "Dad, are you coming back?" He hesitates, then tells them the truth. "I'm planning to, but space is dangerous. I don't know what will happen out there." He tells them he might be away for a few days, or maybe much longer, and there's a chance he won't return. It's a rare, vulnerable moment from a man who has always kept his emotions hidden. Janet watches from afar, knowing how hard that conversation was for him. July 16, 1969, Cape Canaveral, Florida. The massive Saturn V rocket stands tall on the launch pad. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins board the spacecraft. Inside the narrow module, they run through final checks. The countdown begins. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. The roar of engines shakes the Earth as Apollo 11 launches into the sky. Millions watch live on television. The astronauts feel the intense vibrations and G-forces as they break through Earth's atmosphere. After 4 days of space travel, the spacecraft enters lunar orbit. Michael Collins remains in the command module, while Neil and Buzz prepare to descend to the moon in the lunar module, nicknamed Eagle. As they descend, alarms sound. They're headed toward a rocky, unsafe landing site. Neil takes manual control, scanning the surface for a safer spot. Fuel is running low. They're seconds away from having to abort the landing. With steady hands, Neil finds a clear area and gently brings the Eagle down. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." The control room erupts in cheers. The world breathes a collective sigh of relief. But the real moment is still to come. Hours later, Neil prepares to step outside. Climbing down the ladder in his bulky spacesuit, he pauses, then lowers his left foot onto the moon's surface. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. He becomes the first human in history to walk on the moon. Buzz Aldrin joins him shortly after. Together, they collect moon rocks, take photos, and plant the American flag. Their voices crackle through radio back to Earth as they describe the alien landscape. It's dry gray, silent, yet breathtaking. But then, Neil does something deeply personal. He walks away from the camera, towards a crater. Alone, he kneels and reaches into his pocket. He pulls out a small bracelet, Karen's bracelet. Gently, he places it on the moon's surface. It's a private tribute, a father's silent goodbye. A piece of his daughter now rests on the moon. Back on Earth, the whole world watches in awe. News reporters across the globe broadcast the success. Kids dream of becoming astronauts. Scientists celebrate. Meanwhile, Janet sits at home, trying to stay calm. She watches the blurry black and white images on the TV, praying silently. Her husband is over 200,000 miles away. After completing their mission, Neil and Buzz lift off from the moon and reunite with Michael in orbit. Apollo 11 begins its journey home. Upon landing in the Pacific Ocean, the astronauts are retrieved by the Navy. But they're not allowed to reunite with their families right away. They are immediately quarantined in case they brought back unknown lunar bacteria or viruses. Inside the sealed quarantine chamber, Neil sits silently in a small room. Then Janet walks in, separated by glass. They look at each other for a long moment. No words are spoken, but their eyes say everything. He's alive. He made it home. And she still has him.